So like everything you might be studying in life, some of the best ways of learning is by listening or seeing examples. And podcasting is no different, really. So we've picked out 15 of the best podcasts about podcasting. So let's dive in.
Are you looking for a podcast or radio show to appear on? Are you struggling to find a guest for your podcast or radio show? Let me introduce you to MatchMaker.fm. Simply create a profile, narrow your niche, and use the inbuilt messenger to contact potential partners. And the best part, it's free to sign up. So, let's find your match.
Number 1, Meet the Podcasters. Meet the Podcasters is created by one of our sister companies, Podcast.co. It's an in-depth look at the industry changes that have happened over the past few years in what is now becoming a very oversaturated market. The host, James, interviews a different guest on each podcast. Not only will you learn about monetization, development, and marketing, but you'll also hear from some of the biggest podcasters in the industry. Number 2, podcast Pontifications. This is one of those podcasts where I just like the name. I could just say the name all the time. Pontification. What a great word. Hosted by Evo Terra, Podcast Pontifications is for serious podcasters who want to get better. Each episode poses fantastic questions on the past, present, and future of podcasting. And the show's real aim is to simplify podcasting, which can be extremely helpful in what, like I say, an industry that has become so big that topics like SEO in podcasting or even marketing is becoming so confusing. Plus, if you're just starting out, something like podcast distribution or maybe even sponsorship can be quite a daunting prospect. Number 3, the Sounds Profitable Podcast. If you want to learn more about podcast monetization and advertising technology, you'll find the Sounds Profitable Podcast pretty useful. The show talks to industry experts in every episode and learns how to make the most technology that the big players are currently using. Number 4, Inside Podcasting. Now, unfortunately, new episodes of this podcast hosted by Sky Pillsbury are no longer coming out, but you can still go back and listen to all of the previous episodes. Sky is a writer and a self-confessed podcast junkie with a strong interest in audio, and her podcast interviews other podcasters about their craft. Each episode takes listeners on a journey into the minds of some of the most successful podcast hosts out there. And if you're interested in podcast behind the scenes stuff, or maybe origin stories, or maybe some exclusive interviews, then this is one for you. Number 5, Podcraft. If you're familiar with the world of podcasting, then it's likely you will have heard of Colin Gray before. He's the founder and CEO of The Podcast Host, one of the most established podcast blogs on the web. His very own podcast, Podcraft, is the ultimate learning tool when it comes to starting your own podcast. Each episode covers a different podcast-related topic, from equipment to sponsorships, and other recent topics have included content planning, live broadcasting, business-to-business podcasting, and even networks. So whether you're launching a brand new show or aiming to grow the one you already have, this is a great choice. Number 6, Tim Ferriss Show. So while podcasting has been around a while now, it's still relatively new in terms of audio. That being said, there's no denying how fast it took off and how far it's progressed in recent years. Tim Ferriss is one of podcasting's very early adopters, and he took full advantage of the medium way back when it first started. Because of this, he now has a very loyal and engaged podcast community. So it's no surprise he's got a lot of knowledge, advice, and wisdom to share, especially with audio newbies. Now, we have cheated a little bit here because this one isn't actually a podcast, but a show on his YouTube channel. So go ahead and check it out. Number 7, Pod News Daily. Now, because everyone has a podcast these days, they're obviously going to dominate the headlines a lot more than they used to. Thankfully, Pod News is here to keep us all up to date. From the latest thing Joe Rogan said about a thing to new listening data, Pod News has everything you might need to know if you're looking to join the industry. Number 8, The Audacity to Podcast. For anyone new to podcasting, The Audacity to Podcast is a hub of knowledge. Each episode gives listeners an in-depth insight into a different podcast-related topic. So whether you want to learn more about podcast promotion, algorithms, marketing material, even industry stats, there's something for everyone. Number 9, Between Two Mics. As the podcast industry grows, changes, and continues to be defined, Between Two Mics is a podcast on hand to help break it all down. We love this podcast because it's more about developing opportunities and looking into the future rather than the past. Each episode looks at various ideas defining the limits of what's possible in the world of podcasting. The hosts, Zach and Rock, speak to some great guests too, with some even taking the wheel to guest host certain episodes. This strategy allows for each episode to feel very, very different and allows for different perspectives and approaches to be conveyed rather than the same opinions each time. As with most things in life, there's only so much preparation you can do before you need to bite the bullet and just go for it. And that's what the Podcasting Step-by-Step podcast is all about. It's a show built around actionable advice for anyone preparing to make their first episode. Episode topics have previously included how to ask better interview questions, how to speak to different audiences, and how to grow your listenership. And after each episode, you'll probably have the daunting feeling that, oh God, maybe I just need to start recording. Number 11, School of Podcasting. If School of Rock came out in 2024, it would undoubtedly be called School of Podcasting. Host Dave shares his wisdom around planning, launching, and growing a podcast of your own. Join Dave as he shares his wisdom around planning, launching, and growing a podcast of your own. Number 12, She Podcasts. She Podcast is the perfect show for anyone wanting to start a podcast. It's fun, chatty, laid back, and looks at a wide variety of different podcasting subjects. The show's hosts, Jessica and Elsie, add a unique spark too. With a strong emphasis on female empowerment, their goals are to provide women with the technical knowledge needed to start a podcast, and to nurture as many female-led podcasts as possible. 13, The Podcast Review Show. So this one is a bit different from all the others on the list. If you're already running a podcast but you feel like maybe it's not going too great or there's room for improvement, why not send it over to the Podcast Review Show? Here, the hosts, Dave and Eric, will break it down for you. They'll look at your content, the overall flow of your show, the audio quality, even your website, and give you some critical feedback. Plus, if your episode is chosen, then they will allow you to ask them some questions on specific things you might want to improve. And if it's not your podcast they're talking about, then maybe there are still things that will apply to your podcast in there. So definitely worth a listen. 14, Podwrecked. Podwrecked is a show dedicated to helping podcasters survive pod fade. Have you ever heard of pod fade? Well, it's a term that's thrown around from time to time when podcasters get a bit daunted from the prospect of starting their podcast. Sometimes during the process of starting a podcast, people can get a bit confused with different technology or where to post their podcast and maybe just give up entirely. However, Podwrecked is a show dedicated to stopping people from giving up. Episodes discuss equipment, podcasting metrics, and even formatting, all with the hope that the information provided will allow people to go, you know what? No, I'm not going to give up. Let's do this. 15, Podcast Junkies. You a bit nosy like me and want to know more about your favorite podcasters? Well, since 2014, Harry Duran has had more than 300 conversations with some of the most fascinating podcasters in the podosphere. His relaxed conversational style of interviewing allows the guests to just chill out and talk like they're having a really normal conversation. And there you have it, there's 15 of our favorite podcasts about podcasting. Hopefully, after watching this and maybe listening to a few of the podcasts, you'll be feeling inspired to get started with a podcast of your own or continue with one you've already started. We'd love to know which of these podcasts is your favorite, or maybe you have one we haven't mentioned on this list. If so, whack it down in the comments and we'll give it a listen. And until next time, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.